Hey everyone, welcome to today's stream. If you are an Omniverse creator or if you're just a creator, grab your friends, send them the link to this live stream. We have a special guest here, Rafi, who is an art squad creator and an award-winning animator. And what he's going to show us today is going to be mind-blowing. And it's going to change the way creators create things in the future, hopefully, from now on. Before we get started with that, we have some upcoming announcements that I want you guys to be aware of, especially the winter art contest. Edmar, you want to talk
Yes,
about
so
that? Yeah.
yes, totally. So it's actually technically it's called the Winter Art Challenge, and we're using that hashtag Winter Art Challenge. We just announced it last night, and the goal is basically to share and celebrate people's war holiday renders that they're doing with any tools that you love, rendered in Omniverse, and you could share it on social media and use the hashtag Winter Art Challenge. We've also, and we'll be watching that, and we will promote people's work, give you full credit, and celebrate the work you do. We also started a Discord channel specifically to share your work or to ask questions of other creators. So you can go to the Community Challenge channel on our community Discord, which is discord.gg/NVIDIA Omniverse. And then, of course, always just anytime you have work you want to show off, we would love if you upload it to the Omniverse gallery. That is where a lot of eyes from all over the world will be able to see it. Our team will promote it much more easily. You can share a little bit more about what tools you're using, so we can credit those tools also. But yeah, that Omniverse gallery page, you can go ahead and check it out if you want to see what some of the latest work that's been submitted looks like. But the real exciting thing for today is this amazing live stream that Wendy just introduced a minute ago. I have to tell you, so I got a sneak peek of what everybody's about to see last night, and you will be blown away. Actually, we often, I was just in the warm up, I was just sharing that when we try to tell the story about how people can use Omniverse and how the ecosystem kind of all works together thanks to the power of USD. It's one thing to say it and talk about it, or to kind of show different apps that are working with it. It's another thing entirely to actually see it put to use in the way that Rafi is doing today for his show Art Squad, which is just a beautifully looking show. I can't wait until the season starts and it's out there for everybody. I think he's going to post it on plan is put it on YouTube. But Rafi, thank you so much for number one for being part of the community. For anyone who wants to read about Rafi, also we have his Meet the Omnivore blog, which is published recently. We'll post that link in the chat. It's been such a pleasure to meet you and get to know you and learn more about your work, and just to see that how much thought you put into everything, and then to learn more about your background as you were sharing with me recently and also in the presentation. I just can't wait to tell your story to everybody. So Rafi, thank you and welcome. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself first?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for welcoming me on here. It's great to be part of the Omniverse community, and it's been great getting to know everyone here on the call. It's an interesting time for me as a creator because, I've been working in the entertainment industry for about 25 years now, and there are some sort of prerequisites you just sort of led into believing because, you make shows. I'm a showrunner, and which means I originate IP and create sort of transmedia franchises, as the industry calls it. And you're led to believe that you come up with an idea, but you really need an army to realize that idea, and that's because it's been true for a very long time. And I love working with people. I love collaborating. I love building teams and finding the right people who get behind an idea and make it even better than I could ever imagine. But there are some concepts that feel very close to me, and I've often wanted to try and make them independently rather than through a studio system. And to do that, you need a lot of financing, or you need a lot of people willing to work very long hours because the traditional way of making animated shows takes so long. So a lot of those ideas I haven't been able to really, bring to life and realize over the years, and largely down to me not being a sort of a 3D artist. I come from a storytelling background and I like to draw, but my 3D skills have never been, awesome enough for me to be able to do a whole production on my own. But that's really changed over the last year, and in a big part due to sort of exploring Omniverse and how sort of easily I can use it to, take my ideas from drawings to fully rendered scenes, and it was quite astonishing, really. So it's really challenged those prerequisites, those preconceived ideas that I've been trained to believe for like the last 2 decades, that you need render farms, and the process is you have very low res models, and you go through the whole waterfall, and then eventually you have a textured image, and then you go, okay, now I need to update everything. It takes forever to get an animatic. And I started exploring Omniverse at the start of this year, and I also had this show idea. And the two sort of came together. I was like, hey, I think I'm going to try and make this show using these tools. So, today what I'm going to do is try and share my experiences over the past few months, and where I was and where I've got to and where I think I could be going next with this, and the tools that I've been using.
That is awesome. So I want to point out a couple of things you said, which I think are so critical of this whole thing. Number one, you're doing this by yourself. You might have a little support actually from a little one in your house. So we'll see that in a minute. But you're doing this by yourself. Number one, that's just insane to me. When everybody gets to see in a second what you're actually doing. And number two is that this just was not possible, literally, physically, technically possible, as short as just a couple of years ago. All right, only now. And I think the amazing thing about that is that what I'm sure we're about to see in the world is going to be all these new stories from different perspectives that never had a chance to be told because of limitations, barriers, technical barriers or otherwise, that just don't exist today. So that to me is one of the most exciting things, and to be able to kind of kick this off in a way with the story you're telling on Art Squad, which is such a beautiful kind of theme and story. So take it away and drive us through the whole process here.
Cool, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen.
And for anyone who's watching, so feel free to post your questions in the chat. We're monitoring both chats, so we'll ask Rafi any questions as we go along. And then I think we're going to try to hang out for about 15 minutes afterwards on the Discord server, so you could chat with Rafi live if you like. So stay tuned for that later in the show.
Yeah. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. So just a quick question to the chat. How many people in the chat find CG animation intimidating or are generally confused by the 3D software that's out there because it's so complex that it kind of sucks the joy out of your creative process? The reason I asked such a specific question is that's been me for ages. It really sucked the joy out of my creative process because 3D has just been so complex for me. I just don't have that kind of brain that has enjoyed working with the tools that we've seen up until a couple of years ago, until sort of Omniverse and Substance Painter and some of the other tools that I'm going to show you in a minute that really rethink the way we create 3D work. So I can't see the chat, but if you have been confused or intimidated by CG animation, drop an emoji in there. I'd love to know if I'm the only one or if there are others out there that feel just as frustrated.
You're not alone, I can tell you for sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
I feel all right about that then. So as Edmar said, this is a CG animated show that I'm creating on my own. And to be fair, I do call on tech support from the community in Omniverse, and I do the Google searches like everyone else. But in terms of a crew, you're looking at the crew right now. It's me. And I'm doing it on my own as an independent showrunner, writer, producer, director, designer, and so on. You get it. And I started developing this show back in December. I came up with the idea late last year. And so what I'm going to try and do within this session is share the considerations I've had to take on as an indie production. So that's kind of irrespective of Omniverse or the tool set, just my considerations to make a show. And then show you what I've learned so far about trying to make a CG show and where I think I'm headed. So what you're going to see here, I should say up front, is I'm still figuring out how to do this. And everything you're about to see is work in progress. And I can promise you nothing except gloriously awkward T-poses, passable concept art, some low-res play busts, and maybe some janky animation and wobbly performance capture. But that's all part of the messy process of creating, right? And there'll be some happy accidents in rendering that really opened my mind up to what I'm really dealing with here in terms of where the tools are headed, because I never expected some of these first renders to be so far down the line, looking so finished. And that really got me excited, that gave me hope that I could really realize this show. So as I said, I'm not a 3D modeler, nor am I a VFX artist, not by any stretch, but I do love to draw. I've drawn my whole life, and often, characters and stories in my head, I find drawing the quickest way, the most intuitive way to put down my ideas. But I'll also draw stuff around the house, stuff on my desk, or moments at home, like the one in the middle there. And of all the ways that humans visualize ideas, I find working on paper the least uncomfortable. So, that I feel like there's a connection between the hand, the pencil or pen or whatever, or brush, and I usually do it with the pencil, and I can connect with my art, and that process itself gives me more ideas. And I bring that up in that specific way because there are many friction points when you're trying to work with traditional 3D tools that stop you from visualizing in that way, especially if you come from my background. So basically what I'm trying to say, I'm not adept at CG production pipelines, although I've learned a lot over the past year. And throughout my career, I've worked with plenty of projects with CG, but I was either directing crews or I was, had developed the show. And those crews were filled with genuinely talented artists and specialists who have had that knowledge. My focus has always been character and storytelling and world building. So then embarking on making a CG animated show on my own has been technically daunting, but I'm working around those challenges and overcoming my limitations in a big part thanks to Omniverse and that whole ecosystem as it's been designed. So this is a photo I found online when I was trying to put an image together about where my show is set. Okay, so this is just a photograph of Google Images. And so I'm making Art Squad for children aged 6 to 8. It's set in a junior school art classroom where the art materials, objects, and equipment form a lively neighborhood. Now, it's not like Toy Story. These characters interact with human beings just fine, but they live here. This is their home. And it's a colorful community of budding artists. The characters themselves are artists. So this is the squad. Artina, she has illuminating knowledge of art movements and artists. She's sort of like the art history buff. And as you can see, she's a wooden mannequin, right? That you get in art schools. Rivette, she inspires by demonstrating art techniques. So she's all about technique and the craft and the art making process. That's her expertise. 3D brings kindness and well-being through art therapy. So she's very much the one that centers the team, and and art therapy is integrated into a lot of the storylines along with the other two focuses. Figgi is the youngest member of the team. She expands minds through performance art and the power of self-expression. Putt Pupp, that seal, is actually made out of a putty eraser. If you've ever been to art class, the putty erasers are those things that feel like Play-Doh that you can push and pull, and that you use it to erase things, but you can shape it into very fine points. Well, Putt Pupp is made out of that stuff. And Putt Pupp really unites everyone with his boundless enthusiasm, and he's just a lovable puppy, really. Handel is a wooden hand mannequin, and pardon the pun, but Handel's always on hand and makes things happen, and Handel's kind of like gets stuff done for the squad. So this was one of my first renders in Omniverse, and the characters I just sketched them out in VR, and you'll see my process in a bit. And I just put it into Omniverse. I was just the week 1 of learning Omniverse, and I thought, well, let me put some stuff in and just see what the render is like. And I sort of, nearly fell off my chair because it was already so close, even though these were previs assets, so close to, being pitch material, right? The kind of thing you would do if you were pitching this show to a studio. So that got me really excited. And my elevator pitch is the best friends, Artina and Rivette, love to express themselves through music, drawing, painting, dressing up, and performing. They go on adventures with their friends Putt Pupp and Handel, 3D and Figgi, and they use the power of art to solve problems and better understand their world. And learning empathy and social awareness brings out the best versions of themselves and the solutions they create. So They are Art Squad. They make it better with art. So this was my first render, and you can see I used some of the assets from is it the Marbles demo or the art demo that and that Omniverse launched with? So I was using that stuff, and I was like, well, this is really exciting. It's such a intuitive way to build my world, and it's encouraging as well, right? It's when you get a nice feedback loop like this, much like drawing, if you love to draw, you're getting an instant feedback loop, or painting, if you love to paint. The act of doing it, the craft making process is reward in itself, and artists understand this, especially people who are quite hands-on. But I was astonished that I was getting that feedback loop, or close to that feedback loop, in a CG production process, which almost never happened before, right? In fact, never happened before. And most entertainment executives that I've endured start off every pitch meeting by saying they don't have a time for a pitch. So developing IP after IP at studios over the years has trained me to distill a creative concept into a one-pager like this that a super busy executive can glance at on their way into the elevator. So, and as much as that's not a nice way for a creative to develop their ideas, it's actually a good discipline. So, what you see here is that, I've got a log line that says Art Squad is a scripted animated show with vibrant characters who solve problems through the power of art. What's great about that is that's my North Star. So as I develop the show, I know I've always got to be able to reinforce that. And the themes are the adventures of the Art Squad help children aged 6 to 8 build confidence and self-expression in their own art. So every episode has either got to support the confidence aspect or self-expression, or in some way, add value back to those children that's relevant to their lives within the construct of art. And the structure in every episode, the squad combine art therapy, art history, and art technique to better understand their world. So the thinking is, if they've understood their world better through combining those three disciplines or three areas of interest, then by osmosis, the audience will get some tools out of that too. And if you're developing a show now in 2022, you really got to think of multiple platforms, because it's not enough to just be like, I'm on, just on Netflix or just on YouTube or something. You've got to think of others and different formats. And to try and hand animate, what would be about an hour of animated content a month would be quite a challenge. So that's something that wouldn't be possible. So I had to come up with another way of doing that. Likewise, for an indie company, for an indie startup like me, trying to figure out rendering an hour's worth of content and going through render farms and the time it takes to iterate, that was also not going to be viable for me either. So these are things I started to think about. And the way I visualize it is, for any the major parts of any production or any idea that you're trying to realize, narrative content, it's kind of like, imagine these three land masses, right? These three shapes are land masses that are constantly drifting apart. Your creative vision is very ambitious and it's going in one direction, but you've got real limitations of production and it's pulling you in another direction. And then there's the business reality, right? If you're going to make something and you want to keep making it, somehow it's got to be sustainable. So either if you've got to do an hour of content a month, a lot of YouTube shows, they drop the quality a lot, but I didn't really want to do that. So I wanted to keep the quality up, and I wanted to make sure there was an hour of content. So I needed to think of new ways of hitting this sweet spot in the middle there. And the problem, the main challenge of holding these close together, is that the current production methods, the way we've been creating animation for years, was simply not going to work. We needed an alternate approach to producing quality CG animated content, because the audience deserves that. And frankly, as a creative, you want to work on quality stuff, right? But the current way of doing it is kind of not sustainable. So we're all familiar, I think, with this waterfall production model. Everything flows in one direction, and understandably, making changes downstream is a destructive process, resulting in the undoing and redoing of earlier work, which causes a sort of domino effect back downstream again. And this is just a reality a necessary evil we've had to endure in production. And it gets pretty stressful, I have to say, working in this way, but it's just been the way we've had to do it. And it's a very challenging situation for any studio trying to meet the ever-increasing demand for content today, because it's just an insatiable appetite out there in today's market. And working that way would frankly break me as a solo creator. There's also a bigger issue here, which is, the versatility of 3D and CG production can fuel lots of different content formats. They have a lot of things in common, but because 3D gaming matured at a different rate to VFX, and comics going digital emerged at a different rate as well, they all have their own processes. Even though they have a lot of assets in common, those processes just don't talk to each other very well because they've come up in different ways. So, the way we've been doing this stuff could be way more artist friendly, more nimble in the realities of production, and more scalable as an entertainment business that will adapt to sort of fast changing market conditions, and would also seize new opportunities for revenue streams. I want to create a show where I can deliver it in YouTube, but if I want to make a comic, I don't have to create everything else from scratch. I should be able to use the stuff I've created to then create a digital comic out of it. And to do it the traditional way, it would just be too hard, because to try and meet all these different content formats, it would, it's just not going to scale. It's hard enough for a big studio to be able to meet all of these formats, let alone an indie like me. But the truth is, my audience is on a lot of these platforms, so I need to try and reach them on all of them, not just one. So, out of necessity, and that feedback loop giving me encouragement, I started exploring alternate approaches to that pipeline, primarily within Omniverse, because I really like the theory of being able to use USD to make everything, work together a lot better. But it was still a theory because I hadn't put it into practice. And the creative vision of Art Squad requires sort of like a photorealistic world that's juxtaposed with worlds sprung from fantastically expressive artwork. And that concept is best shown through this character. Her name is Artina. Artina's superpower is to literally dive into an art book and immerse herself in a world constructed from that piece of artwork. And in that artwork, she meets and speaks with the artist that created it. So experiencing the artist's worldview usually helps Artina come up with ideas to solve a problem that she's having, in real life, at least in her reality. And that's what she brings to the Art Squad when they go, problem solving. Obviously, as you can see from my sketches, she's based on those posable wooden figures from art class, but she's also a kid, so I adjusted the proportion. The one in blue on the far left is generally the proportions of the ideal wooden figure, and she's got sort of much smaller proportions. And some of my early doodles were like, at her scale, would she use a bottle cap and a pen cap to form like a table, and Play-Doh to do some sculpture and stuff like that, and explore different head shapes. And with those drawings, I modeled this figure entirely in VR using Masterpiece Studio Pro. In fact, I had some help on this from a talented friend called Ian Crichton. He's a talented 3D artist, and he's also really into VR, and he really upskilled me in using these tools. And what I realized playing with Masterpiece VR is sculpting inside VR feels like an extension of the drawing process, because you've got a tool at the end of your hand and you have that direct connection in a way that working with a keyboard and mouse or even a stylus never really did it for me. And that's because I'm actually in 3D space creating 3D. So it makes sense, right? If you're going to create a three-dimensional thing, why not do it in a three-dimensional interface? And that's what VR did for me. And once I got the hang of the app, amazingly, she was modeled and textured in just a morning, and that felt really good. And this was the first render test of the production model, and pretty advanced.
Amazing
for something that quick. And Artina's best friend Rivette is gifted at picking up new art techniques, but she's missing her emotional intelligence chip. And you can count on this lovable robot's attention to detail, because such a craft person, and to always say the right thing but in the wrong way. Still, being a robot means Rivette stays calm in any situation, so they've got that going for them too. And Rivette again started, I think this was one of the earlier drawings, and I really wanted to mix different materials with Rivette, because Rivette is based on stop motion armatures, so the skeleton inside the puppets and stop motion figures, that's what her body is, and a mix of metal and wood, and a well-loved eraser for a head, pushpin eyes, and a single paperclip spectacle. Again, she was modeled entirely in VR. Again, Ian was helping me get to grips with the application here, and in the same way as Artina was made, but a bit more intricate. That this sort of immersive grid and alignment tools that you get in Masterpiece lets you snap to angles really easily. So it's great for modeling machined parts like this. And working in layers obviously helps you keep track of the different elements too. And when I'm sculpting in VR, I now stand up when I'm working in VR. My whole body gets involved, which helps me a lot when I'm trying to work out 3 dimensions. So then that model, I put it through Substance Painter, which I love using Substance Painter because it's so much like Photoshop, but it's a great stepping stone. If you know Photoshop really well, you can pick up Substance really easily. And that hair was a lot of fun to model. I'd modeled that hair literally by grabbing a bit of virtual clay and moving it like Play-Doh. In fact, it felt as inviting and as unintimidating as Play-Doh to create that hair. And to do something as organic as that hairstyle, the traditional way in Maya or something, I would just get lost in that process and never get good results. But here in VR, it just, you do it as quick as you can move your hand. That's as quick as you can sculpt something like that, something organic like that. So basically, the right combination of VR tools with traditional ones has kind of transformed my capabilities in look development. I mean, what you're seeing here is not actually frames from the animation. This is all my look dev process, and which is super advanced for me to be able to get look dev this far along in terms of render quality and lighting. This character is called 3D. She's one of the more abstract character designs made out of squishy, sponge-like knitted blocks. This is the sort of the concept sketch that I based her on, and the reason she's made out of that material is that she's the resident art therapist, right? She has a calming influence on the squad and believes in well-being through art making. She's also the drummer in the band. Here she is setting up her drum kit. This was also rendered in Omniverse. Again, it's part of my look dev process. But to model her, I didn't use Masterpiece for that. I used something called Tavori. I wanted her to have the charm and simplicity of a handmade toy for preschoolers. So using this VR app, Tavori, I explored designs the way a child might play with blocks in nursery. And Tavori's interface, as you can see, offers a delightful way to rapidly prototype your design ideas, not to mention playful. So you grab, place, stack, rearrange, recolor, resize, and reshape, all very intuitive and natural with the direct control in VR. And this method was the perfect fit for this character. It reminded me that creativity isn't about working for a living; it's really about playing for a living. And assembling her was like I was playing with blocks again, like a child would. And then again, those blocks I brought into Substance Painter, created the appropriate textures and colors and stuff. And hopefully, you agree that playfulness comes through in the final design, don't you think?
She is my favorite character, I have to say. So when we first started sharing some of your images internally with the Omniverse team, Madison, who we work with, immediately was like, "Oh my gosh, this is the cutest character I've ever seen," something along those lines. And it's adorable. It looks so realistic and so cute, and the personality is just all your characters, the personality seems to shine through, which is very magical to see just from images. But it's so amazing, man.
Oh,
I
thank
also
you.
love the attention to detail you have within her knitted structure. There's little threads that come out.
Yeah.
So if she was
Yeah.
played with kids, that's definitely
Yeah.
what's gonna happen.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
would like
I mean,
I
had
would
a-
like 3D for my bookshelf. Where can I buy one?
like book 3D for my bookshelf too. So I'm seeing that the creative process I adopt, even from character to character, is instrumental to achieving my sort of intended design. So the process itself, much like drawing and much like traditional art making, I'm able to bring some of that to the 3D process. It's not like a one size fits all. This was the right way to create 3D, and masterpiece sculpting voxel sculpting was the right way to create the other two characters. So achieving my intended design and ultimately the feel of the show is tied to the process I follow to realize it. So a big squishy magical being that inspires the squad to have fun and express themselves, and most of all to just have a go, was born out of that process. And a hug from 3D is always lovely, as you can imagine, with that being a soft cushiony character. And then Putt Pupp is Artina's faithful pet, as I mentioned before, made out of kneadable putty eraser. I'm sure, Ashley, you're very familiar with putty erasers, right?
Oh, horribly so. My background is a middle school art teacher, so you can only imagine the abuse that poor Putt Putt would get in that classroom.
Plays tambourine in the band and is currently learning to shapeshift, but being a pup hasn't really mastered the sort of needable putty shapeshifting skills. But one thing he can do is he can teleport between tumblers of water, which makes him a great scout for the squad. So when they're trapped or they're trying to find, something in the distance, he can hop between glasses of water, tumblers of water, as you can imagine there's loads in an art classroom, and find a route out and help them navigate on their various adventures. So because he's made out of essentially Play-Doh-like material, the Tavori approach wasn't appropriate for him. I'm back in Masterpiece here. As you can see here, I've blocked him out and roughly, and I'm moving stuff around the way I would move Play-Doh. And you can also rig in Masterpiece. So here I've drawn bones in there and testing my rig in VR. And rigging in VR was quite a revelation to me because rigging was always like a completely inaccessible for me because it was just so confusing to try and rig something in space in a 2D interface. But in VR, you literally just reach in and draw the bones through your figure. These are some renders in Omniverse with Putt Pupp. And I'm using Substance Painter for the texture. It's a lot like, it's a lot like working in Photoshop, as I said before. So the learning curve wasn't too bad. But mimicking the look and feel of a massive putty eraser, that was a lot of fun with the fingerprints and the smudge marks and stuff like that. And Handel, who I introduced before, is the wooden hand mannequin. I actually started the texturing process inside Masterpiece as well because it's got a way of roughly blocking in your textures within VR, which is cool because you're just painting directly in there. And they're PBR textures, so they work really nicely if you export them into a render like Omniverse Create. I've tried rigging characters in Maya and Blender and always end up drawing the skeleton in random places, often way off to the side or far off in the scene, nowhere near the character model. But in VR, it's much clearer. I literally reach inside the model and draw through it. And I found myself aligning my real-world hand with this model in VR and connecting with the design requirements like that. Obviously, I couldn't move the virtual hand with it, but just getting a sense of space by putting my hand lining up with it, not everyone's going to do this, but it really helps you understand, what it is that you're creating. So again, I'm connecting with 3D and CG creation like I've never been able to do before because of these smarter tools that are out now. And this is sort of the test of the rig, and you can see it's a pretty dense mesh. And Figgi is the youngest member of the squad, and budding performance artist. This little creature has a big heart and empathizes deeply with the problems of others, and a quality undermined by a short attention span and even shorter temper. Prone to tantrums, but easily distracted by a new worthy cause. A fascinating character to sort of write for. And if it wasn't immediately clear, Figgi is basically a monster made out of pencil shaving. So a ball of pencil shaving with googly eyes and sort of pipe cleaner arms and feet.
I'm glad you got rid of his teeth. He's much less frightening.
Yeah.
With his temper tantrums.
That's right. Thanks for noticing. Yeah. And then, funny enough, the teeth became apparent once I was doing it in 3D. I was like, those don't look right, so I got rid of them. But those are things you discover when you move through the process. On the subject of art direction, my guiding principles for art directing the show include a tone that is warm and inviting with a very tactile feel, because I really want to inspire the viewer to see their own art environment as a world of possibilities, right? The characters have bright personalities and explore their world confidently. That's what I love to encourage in the audience too. And this world is representing real props and environments is lit in a way that is expressive but plausible in real life. So considering it's an art show, why am I going for a realistic look? Well, because I need to contrast it with the stylized art worlds that they visit. If you remember, Artina has the power to jump into art books and explore the world, as realized by the artist. So you really want that contrast, and you want like a space that represents the viewer space, and that's why I'm going for this style. The lighting, materials, and textures It's faithful to real life, but the classroom isn't mundane. At least I'm trying to make it enticing, to represent the wonder and excitement of learning art and making stuff at school. And funnily enough, I'm making props, using bits and bobs like out of a box of craft materials. That's how I'm making my props. And like wrapping thread around the pin and pulling it across the board. At 1-to-1 scale, it's the size a full-size guitar would be in real life on me. And that's how I'm, drawing this. And I can draw a loose line and then tighten up things I'm using Gravity Sketch here, by the way, tighten up things in VR and make adjustments to the assembled parts and then scale it down to see what would it look like, on the character itself. So it's awesome to be able to string a virtual guitar as if it's full size on me, knowing it's going to be scaling down to the character. So the conceit is these instruments, because these characters are in a band, these instruments are custom built by the characters. So, for example, this is Artina's banjo. She's made it with stuff she found around the classroom. I'm sure you can recognize a lot of this stuff. Because making stuff makes her happy. And she named it Banjoline. And then the cherry red bass is a 6-string wonder with matching push-pin tuning pegs and rubber bands strung across a body built with a roll of red tape and a popsicle stick. The electric lemon is a 6-string guitar built with a popsicle stick, a bottle cap, push-pin tuning pegs, and some thread. By the way, this was all rendered in Omniverse. The stripped-down disco bass is a favorite for slap bass funk. The resonance of those rubber bands against the paint lid is nicely dissipated by the emery board. And the butterfly bass is a prototype electro-funk instrument made with a popsicle stick and Play-Doh. Of course, what else would you use? And then this is Rivette's favorite, the metal moth. Is a 4-string beast featuring a popsicle neck, plastic gem body, Play-Doh strings, and whammy bar. So as you can imagine, I've had a blast making these instruments all in VR and then bringing them into Omniverse to make them look like they were created by the characters in their real world. As you can see here, this was also rendered in Omniverse. So the visuals are now indistinguishable, even though this is development art, is now indistinguishable from the way the show is going to look at the end. And I'm still only, I'm technically not even, producing animation yet. So this was, now I was kind of hitting my stride with this whole process of creating in VR and then texturing in Substance, and then using Livelink to check my textures in Omniverse without having to manually export stuff. And in Gravity Sketch you can draw lines and splines. If you're familiar with Adobe Illustrator or a vector drawing tool that has Bezier curves, it's the same principle, but here it's spatial. So like bending paper clips or creating a wire sculpture, if you've ever worked in those mediums as an artist. So creating the twists, bends, and contortions are much more intuitive, and it makes for a surprisingly satisfying creative process. So crafting props this way feels like a call to join in, like, for me to become a participant or character within this fictional world. So I'm really kind of crossing this whole, this big gap between not only my 2D skills and 3D, but now in a funny way, as I write and I come up with story ideas, I'm getting a lot of those ideas by simply inhabiting this virtual world that I'm building it. So with that technical barrier considerably lowered for me, frankly, I just muck around and make something for the joy of it. And that's when I enjoy art the most. This way I get a sense of, immediacy and spontaneity in my CG production process. And I got to say, it's quite rewarding and it motivates me to keep going. And Gravity Sketch and Masterpiece and Tavori aren't the only VR apps I use. In fact, I often do my layouts in VR using Omniverse Create XR. So it's got the same, you can load up the same scene that you would have in Omniverse Create, but you put on a headset and now you can place your objects around the scene. And quite often I dress my sets like this. And, what interests me is how this tech, which is essentially virtual production in a lot of ways, even though it's accelerating live action production, that same tech can have even more, impact. It can be even more pivotal for the animation industry. So here I'm using a Vive Pro with Omniverse Create XR to rapidly explore ways to dress my set. And as you can see, moving virtual objects in this set feels a lot like pulling together an art direction mood board or arranging props on a theater stage in the real world. This grab and place technique. And as I'm constantly writing new episodes, so the ability to visualize alongside my writing process inspires story ideas and helps me discover new moments of character development. So it's streamlining my design iterations and proving helpful to my story development process too. Conscious of the time. Okay, we've got a few more minutes. I'll just go through my animation process and then we'll be at the home stretch. So working like this is essentially deepening my empathy with the characters and their world. And that's a really important thing as a writer or a creator. You really want to get into the mind of the characters. So when you can literally sit in their world and look around and wonder, well, what would I do if I was, this size in this room? It's a game changer for creators, especially creators who are visually led. So for this show, I'm striving for character animation with empathy and truth in their performance. And her simple humanoid proportions mean that I could auto-rig Artina in Masterpiece Studio and then import into Tavori. And Tavori is a VR app that's made for animators. And it's the most fun I've ever had posing CG characters. You get to have that direct interaction that we've seen before, much like a stop-motion animator's process, except you have an undo button because it's a digital space. And that direct contact is such a wonderful way to connect with the character I'm animating. So when I'm posing my characters for exploring different images or previs art, this is a great way to just rapidly quickly churn out a whole bunch of poses. But unfortunately, keyframe animation, as I said before, isn't going to scale for this production. You see, to sustain myself as an independent creator, I have to feed the beast that is YouTube and all the other platforms. To build traction, you need to drop new content at least on a weekly basis, fresh content. And that adds up to a minimum of an hour a month, as I said before. So I'm looking into performance capture. And this rig is affordable and streams motion straight into Unreal Engine. This is the Perception Neuron Studio, I think it's called. It's made by Noitom, Perception Neuron. And so you can direct everything in real time on set, from blocking to full takes, and try camera moves and so on, and iterate quickly with room to experiment. Like game engines like this also leave the door open for live interactive formats like YouTube Live and Twitch and Insta Reels and all that stuff. All platforms with revenue streams to potentially support my production. So here you can see the actor who is a member of the family. She's got the suit on and she's driving down into the Perception Neuron capture software, which is then streaming directly to Unreal Engine. And of course, with Unreal Engine having native support for USD and live streaming, can update your Omniverse scene in real time as well. So it's a great chain to send your animation through. And then for the facial capture, I'm using my iPad to drive Putt Pupp's expressions here in real time. I turned off head tracking on purpose here so I could check the blend shapes in isolation, so you can really see what's going on in the. Oop, what's happened with my video? Has the video stopped for you guys too?
Yes.
Right now it's paused. Yeah.
Okay.
There it
There goes.
There we go. Yeah, so in any event, I can rapidly experiment with performance choices here and explore different takes and options I simply wouldn't have time to if I only keyframed my poses. So that's where I think my character animation is headed. And what's nice about the iPad app that links to Unreal and then can feed live into Omniverse is, as we've seen, the cast of characters I have here are fairly diverse, different, not only different proportions, but even their eye shapes are different from character to character. I'm using full body tracking, just like you saw in that video, for Artina, Rivette, and 3D. But for Figgi and Handel, I'm using parts of the mocap suit as a puppeting system. And for Putt Pupp, it's a bit of a hybrid because he doesn't have legs the way we have legs. So his face is driven by me, by that same iPad app. And you can see 3D's expressions are also driven by the same iPad app. In fact, the same data is going in. You just retarget it to suit your model. So it's a very efficient way of capturing motion and then interpreting in different ways. So when I widen my eyes, 3D's eyes scale up like in an anime style. And when I move my hand like a puppet, Figgi's hand moves. And you can see here there's full body tracking here and iPad driving the face. So it's still a very graphical look on her face, even though it's capturing human expressions from the iPad. It's just distilled down to much simpler blend shapes, as you can see. They're very graphic. So I've been
Amazing.
talking a lot about Livelink. Let me just show you real quick how I'm using it. So activating Livelink in Maya, Substance, and UE5 is kind of where I get most of my cross-app interaction. And I populate the set that is lit and shot in Omniverse Create, which updates in real time when I make changes in any of the other apps. And it's a bit like, to use the band analogy, if you ever listen to a band that's jamming and improvising on the spot, contributing their bit, yet never playing over the others, so everyone kind of just syncs in harmony. Great bands do it all the time, like one sort of organic unit working together, like a jazz band or something. And that's how it feels now to me when I work with these different 3D apps. They're starting to sync and play together just like a seasoned live act. And these two innovations, the innovations of like USD and the Omniverse sort of infrastructure effectively enable me to kind of improvise and jam as I create Art Squad. So it's a very fluid process. That whole idea of like you've got to write all your episodes up front and then go through the waterfall and pray that you don't have to undo work. Well, now it's a much more organic process because this constant live state brings the immediacy of working in theater or even a live action set, like a virtual production set. It's bringing it into the animation process, which was unthinkable, just a few years ago. Animation was always known for being very labor intensive and very sequential in its production pipeline. And at the end of the day, it's accelerating my ability to realize this show as an indie creator. And I really think this is a promising way for independent artists and storytellers to unlock a direct-to-consumer model. You no longer have to go through those armies of big, high-cost studio setups and armies of production crew to get your ideas realized. The bit I'm working on right now is depicting the art worlds that Artina travels to in different episodes. So here's that juxtaposition I've been talking about. So you saw her rendered in Omniverse, which I used to depict the real world, and then I use a plugin called Flare in Maya to directly draw onto the models to create a watercolor effect or an acrylic effect or chalk. And up until Flare being released, the way you would do this in 3D is you would have shader graphs and complex code and stuff that's beyond my expertise. But being able to draw directly onto the model to create these effects in 3D mixes procedural animation along with art directed brush strokes that I directly draw onto the character. That's a completely different way of creating this stuff. So I'm really excited about what this combination could do, because Omniverse has got the real world lighting and ray trace visuals locked up beautifully for my show. And for the instances where they travel into these other worlds, I'm now experimenting with these different looks for those sequences. So just to wrap up on the production pipeline, I've learned that creating spatially in VR considerably eases the technical pains of working with 3D software. And this opens the door for visual artists of all disciplines, like graphic designers, illustrators, performers, and live action directors even, to enter the world of CG animated storytelling in ways that just weren't possible before. You can put on a headset and now you can direct your animated characters in the world that they're going to be in. And because it offers as much more of a native way to interpret and build in 3D. So by my estimation, as you can see on that chart there, some of this stuff is between 25 and 90% faster, to do it compared to how I was doing it before. And it really is, empowers artists and enriches the briefing and review process. Because if you're a show creator now, you can go into the set really quickly and give feedback directly in 3D space, which cuts out a lot of confusion in the feedback loop that you would get the 2D method. And then creating with real-time engines, particularly with USD and Omniverse as the backbone, instead of the waterfall process, I now work in loops, 2 loops basically. The purple loop is basically my previous process, but as you saw, the previous visuals are quite far along and sophisticated. So I'll start my story reel and animatic and layout design and stuff like that in the VR apps, and then plug them into Omniverse and continue working in Omniverse Create to do my layouts in VR. And because Maya and Painter sync live to Omniverse really well, I can iterate through those in that loop. And that naturally, once I get to a certain point, I can naturally flow into the second loop, that bigger loop in green, where I'm going through the performance capture, the shaders and lighting and animation through Omniverse, back around to Maya and Painter if I need to change stuff, and through Unreal and back again. And crucially, I'll have those applications up all at the same time, and I don't have to do the manual export to FBX and then import and all of that stuff. It's just in a constant live state. In essence, it is more nimble and versatile and scalable. A pipeline model like this really enhances spontaneity and collaboration throughout the production process. Even voice acting and facial animation can be updated right at the end when you've got something like the iPad app and you just need to make some changes to the performance, because you don't have to worry about that lengthy rendering process because they're working completely in real time. So I started developing Art Squad, late last year in December, and this is where I am with it today. Thanks.
Amazing, amazing. I can't tell you how inspiring this is to watch and to hear you explain your process. I think you're really helping a lot of creators who wouldn't know where to start with some of the stuff. I think we got a lot of comments specifically regarding your use of VR in creating art assets, and watching those videos, super compelling. In terms of, you said earlier that you're not really a 3D modeler, by nature, but these tools actually enable you to do what's so amazing 3D modelers have to take years to be able to do. That I feel like is fascinating. And sorry for not introducing Ashley earlier. So Ashley's on our NVIDIA team. We chatted a little bit in the warm up. But her background is an art teacher, and she's helping right now doing Discord live streams on the community Discord we have, showing extension development. She showed a nice example today of what you created with the help of Rafi, of a nice croissant scene with
Eagles, croissants with cream.
But Ashley, so I'm curious, and also everybody knows Queen of the Stream, obviously. Wendy's background is art as well. People who know the stream know Wendy's background is art. So I'm really curious to hear what you two think watching this, because for me, it's pretty mind blowing to see how he's using art in this way.
I have to say, the immersion of creating art and being in that art space with your characters that you've created, I can't even describe how much that would just produce so much creativeness out of you, creating pieces, being in the environment with your characters, and I love how you said that you were able to just create these things like you were playing with Play-Doh. That, like you said, in the creative process, it's getting messy that is really important, and moving things around like Play-Doh or charcoal or stuff like that. It's all part of the fun.
And the 3D creating stuff in 3D and VFX has always felt so clinical. Like you have to work really hard to get that messy and to get the noise and all of that in there.
Yes.
And I personally find it much easier to come up with ideas and solutions if there's that random and chaosness that I'm responding to, because you're getting feedback from the medium itself. But when the medium is so precise and clinical, it's hard to get that feedback. Obviously, if you're an architect or an engineer, you need that precision. But when you're creating something like this, you need a little bit more, it needed to be a bit more alive. And, when I'm creating in those VR apps, there's a ceiling with those VR apps that if you're sculpting and stuff, you can only really do one or two assets at a time. But when I bring them all into Omniverse and I put on the headset, that's when I'm really inhabiting the show, because I can bring all my assets there and it's all that real-time ray tracing that makes it look like the show, and I'm in it. So that was the most mind-blowing thing.
Yeah, for me, watching you go into Create XR and move around the assets as if you're just like playing around with real objects in a scene. I started my 3D journey in environmental 3D environment creation and lighting, And I was always so frustrated by the disconnect of sitting at the computer, having to use my mouse to move around my assets and use my mouse to move around the light. And it just felt like I wasn't able to really blend my artistic nature. And then, Create XR, these VR painting and sculpting apps really have they've spoken to us as artists. And I used to just brag to my students because I taught middle school students and they were super into the VR stuff. That was their journey. And I'd be like, did you guys see this VR app? Did you see this 3D sculpting app? Basically everything we're doing here in the classroom, you don't need to go buy all of those pastels that are super expensive. You already have that VR helmet that you got for Christmas. Just throw that on, download the Gravity Sketch, and create something, and then bring it to the class. Let's showcase it. Let's all walk around it. And it felt so much more immersive and so much more of the artist than it did of the technical stuff. So I loved seeing that. That was so cool.
Really fascinating. And what advice would you have, Rafi, for someone who's just watching this for the first time, learning about Omniverse the first time maybe, and seeing what you're able to do as a single creator? What would you say that should get started?
Yeah, well, I think download it. It's free. What have you got to lose? You download it, and there are loads of presets in Omniverse Create that definitely encourage me to keep exploring because you get that feedback loop. So, for instance, physics simulations, I wouldn't know where to start with that in Maya and stuff like that. You would never get that feedback loop so quickly. But there are presets within this that are just fun to play with. Grab some primitive shapes that are built in or some props that are built into Omniverse, drag and drop the physics presets, and just let that play. Play around with that. Literally play with the physics thing, and it'll inspire you to explore further. And I'm not the person that benefits from watching all the tutorials and then go and make something. I'm the kind of person okay, what do I want to make? And then I'll remember what the tools are. And if you've got a goal in mind, there's going to be a YouTube video on the Omniverse site. I've yet to come across a need that I have that isn't already covered by either the documentation or a YouTube demonstration. So I would do that. I would think about what do I want to make, and how do I do it in Omniverse, and then that'll open the door for the exploration, because the feedback loop is the best I've had in a 3D CG engine like this, a real-time engine.
Yeah, that is absolutely the goal. I've said this on live streams before. Omniverse lets you get to the fun stuff fast. It's really, really fun.
It's true. And Rafi, you have a few great places people can go to check out your work. First of all, you have an awesome YouTube channel where you always share great content. So that is just Rafi Animates, right? Is that the...
Yes, Rafi Animates. I've been sharing I try to share my workflow in just a little production blog, where I'm at, what I've learned, how I'm solving certain challenges with this. That's where you'll find it on my YouTube channel.
Okay, cool. You also have a website, rafianimates.com. You also post pretty regularly on Instagram too, right?
Yeah, Instagram and LinkedIn as well. People seem to like the stuff I do on LinkedIn because I go into a little bit more detail about the tools and stuff there. And I have an Instagram that's also Rafi Animates, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming and sharing your knowledge and your experience. And I think, like I said, I think this is so inspiring for people, and really great to have someone like you that are so willing to share it with the world. Really excited to what's coming next for you in the show. I can't wait to watch it come together. Also very excited for our top secret project that other people will find about soon, that Rafi is helping us out with. So the marketing team is watching this right now, so I can't say anything.
Please as well.
But stay tuned. So anyway, and for everybody else, I hope you really enjoyed this. If you want to hang out for a few minutes with Rafi, I think he's got about 10 or 15 minutes to spare. So we're going to go to our Discord server right now. It's just discord.gg/NVIDIA Omniverse. Hop in. Wendy and Ashley will be there with Rafi. You can unmute yourself if you like, ask your question. And just hang out with us for a bit. And also don't forget about the new community art challenge we have going on. So go to the Discord channel, community challenges, and you'll find out all the information. But we would love to see what you create for the holidays using Omniverse and the other tools that you love. We will definitely share and promote. Rafi, again, thank you so much. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Wendy, for doing such a great job on the stream.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
We'll see you
everybody
later.
on Discord. Come on over.
Bye.